Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm your host, Olaf Pajak, and this is the inaugural episode of the Big Boys Can't Cry campaign. As outlined in the campaign manifesto published on the website, Big Boys Can't Cry aims to create a society where men are more in touch with their feelings and able to express them without the fear of judgment. I'm joined here today by Dr. Richard White, PhD, a professor of communication studies at the University of Texas at Arlington, which is located in the heart of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In this podcast, we will be discussing his research, specifically focusing on his doctoral dissertation titled Relational Red Flags, Detecting Undesirable Qualities in Initial Romantic Encounters. A link to his dissertation will be provided in the description below. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. White. How are you?
Of course, I'm fine. Thank you for having me. It's a little cold here in Texas, but it's winter, so I think it's cold almost everywhere.
Oh, yeah. So, shall we begin?
Absolutely. Let's begin.
All right. So, you speak of a definition of a relational red flag. Now, for each individual person, I think it differs what a red flag might be. So, would you mind just outlining your dissertation's definition for what constitutes a relational red flag?
Sure. That's a great question. It's a little meaty, so this may take me a moment, but it's just the formal academic study of it. Red flag is just a pop culture term. So I wanted to study what that meant through a formal academic lens and make sense of it scientifically and what is meant by the term red flag. That is what we do in the social sciences. We study human nature, which helps us make better sense of our world. And that's the problem. Red flags have never really been studied empirically before. The only studies that had been done were in the realm of dating abuse and violence. Indeed, for what little research has been done on detecting caution in these romantic relationships, the vast majority of that research has been done on becoming aware of whether you are in abusive and violent relationship. Now, I know that we'll talk a little bit about this more later on, but just briefly to make sense of why the study of that is important. Again, the vast majority of research that has been done has only been done on conducting whether you're aware of being in that type of relationship, an abusive, violent relationship. That, however, only affects a small percent of all romantic relationships that are currently occurring. Now, there's a lot of statistics out there, but they all say roughly the same thing. According to a study by the Bureau of Justice Special Report on Intimate Partner Violence, only 20% of dating couples reported some type of physical violence in their relationship, leaving the overwhelming majority of other dating relationships, 80%, free of physical violence. What, though, are the relational red flags that do not include physical violence? So I wanted to study that and see what was fact versus fiction regarding these red flags. So it is important to call attention to the unhealthy production and consumption of romantic information that pervades our society. Social media, popular films, television shows, music, books, all of these things perpetuate gross inaccuracies about romantic relationships, particularly regarding dating and the overall general courtship process. So too often does the general public rely on these pop culture tropes and baseless romanticized assertions of love that are not only factually inaccurate when compared to the social sciences literature, but are also harmful as they lead people to believe and act on information that is simply not true. By understanding these relational red flags and the role that they play in initial romantic interactions, i.e. first or informal first few dates, we can begin to dispel the myths that exist in the information that perpetuates romantic relationships and the general incompatibility and dissimilarities between individuals during this courtship process. So, after conducting a several mixed method study that included hundreds of participants, which resulted in the production of 4,000 red flag responses that had to be coded and analyzed through a series of statistical analyses, what my research found was a clear definition as well as the most common red flags and the most severe red flags. And that definition is a creation of the term relational red flag. Now that's relational, not relationship. Relational is a well-known word in the social sciences, specifically in the study of interpersonal relationships and communication. It simply means the way in which two or more people or things are connected. So the definition of a relational red flag is any undesirable quality, which can be a characteristic, behavior, state, or trait, that a person possesses that the other individual would not want in a potential romantic partner. Why? That is because these relational red flags are signals. signals that represent the undesirable qualities that people identify as being costly to a healthy, stable relationship. Relational red flags are seen as undesirable qualities because they conflict. They conflict with the individual's own expectations, similarities, and compatibilities. By exploring these relational red flags, we can better understand the dynamic role they play in various aspects of our interpersonal interaction, as they are perhaps most importantly inherent to the initial development of romantic relationships. So, as my research shows, relational red flags are actually a product of half a dozen different major theories and areas of empirical scientific studies, which include signal detection theory, error management theory, costly signaling theory, expectation violation theory, dating abuse and violence, similarities and compatibilities, and lastly, a concept called fatal attraction. Now, I know that was a lot, but relational red flags represent a lot. They are something we have all encountered, and they play a major role in our lives. So I'm sorry if I couldn't give you a 10-second answer, but I tried my best to synthesize what is a 200-page dissertation into a 3-minute answer.
Yeah. Well, I think, well, thank you for that, first of all. I think, yeah, I think the big takeaway from that is relational red flags are basically signals of undesirable qualities. And I think, would it be correct to assume then that each individual person would have their own sort of criteria for what constitutes a red flag?
They have their own criteria. Yes and no. Are you asking, are there universal red flags? Something like that?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I wouldn't use the word universal.
Right.
We try not to use that word in the social sciences. Universal means absolute, and that is problematic in the social sciences. Why? Because we study people, and people vary. There are 8 billion people on Earth, and we all have unique characteristics. We are unique in countless ways. Now, what we can do is notice patterns and how large swaths of people behave. Those patterns are what we study. And what my research has found is, yes, there are 9 major relational red flag categories and 23 subcategories. And there are even a few subcategories and even a few subcategories. But there's 9 major categories with 23 subcategories. Now, these 9 major relational red flag categories represent the things that the vast majority of people would want to avoid in a potential romantic partner. Now, again, I say vast majority instead of universal because people vary. So while there are several common relational red flags, the nature of many of them is relative, as what is preferred by one individual is, of course, seen as abhorrent to another, and vice versa. This is particularly true of red flags that relate to what are called dissimilarities in personal preferences and attitudes, values, interests, and hobbies. So, for example, let's say hobbies. Let's say playing hours and hours of video games is important to you. So you may want a partner who will play video games with you, or at the very least, not discourage you from playing them. Now, that, however, may be a red flag for someone else, someone who enjoys more time outdoors, someone who has no interest in video games. To them, if on a dating app they're matched with someone who plays a lot of video games, that may be a red flag to them. Whereas to the person who plays a lot of video games, someone who spends a lot of time outdoors and does not like video games, that is a red flag to them. So the specific nature of them is certainly very personal, but the overall category that those little niche things fit into does exist and has been coded, and there is a typology for that. I hope that makes sense.
It does make sense, thank you. So it's basically just dependent on individuals rather than any sort of ultimate, what is a red flag or is this a red flag? It's just like something that one person likes in a person, someone else might be vehemently opposed to, correct?
Yes and no. I'm sorry, I know that's not a clean answer. You are doing a great job, but yeah, it's just something like, I do not want this particular specific behavior in someone. And what I've also found in my research is red flags change over time, from when you're a young adult in your late teens to early 20s to whether you're in your late 20s to 30s. What the research has found is they change over time. What is a red flag when you're 18 may not be a red flag to you anymore when you're 25 or 30 or older. So we still have, again, we study people and we notice patterns, and we have found that, again, things that are coded as deviant behavior are things that a vast majority of people would not want, okay? Now, as I said, there's exceptions to everything. There are people who perhaps would prefer those destructive behaviors, but most of us would not. So yes and no. There are large scale categories, but at the end of the day, you can still code it into a niche of my date didn't bring me flowers. That to me is a red flag, which has been coded. That would fit under violating traditional courtship norms, such as the man has to pay for a meal. That is traditionally seen as a courtship norm, something like that. Whereas to someone else who is more progressive, that is not a red flag. It's no, I don't follow traditional courtship norms. I am more progressive. So I believe the men and women should split the meal, or the woman should pay, or whatever fits their ideology. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that clarification. Now, since the campaign is focused heavily on domestic abuse, I think it's important for us now to sort of separate red flags from domestic abuse, because there is, of course, an overlap that we see. But, you know, just because someone exhibits some sort of relational red flag does not necessitate that, you know, is going to evolve to abusive behavior.
Yes, that is correct. Most of us have been on a number of dates throughout our adult lives with a wide range of individuals. Now, if you're young, you may not have been on too many dates, but as the older you get, you venture out more and you experience more distinct dates with other individuals. And most, if not nearly all of the individuals we try to get to know romantically were not violent. And even though they did not display any violent tendencies, the vast majority of those romantic initial encounters still did not lead to an established romantic relationship. Why is that? I'm asserting this is because even in the absence of emotional, psychological, and physical violence, we still saw other undesirable qualities in them that we would not want in a potential romantic partner. So what were those relational red flags that we noticed that made us decide that we did not want to pursue a romantic relationship with them? So briefly, the only cautionary signs, as I said earlier, of romantic relationships that had been given any significant study was in the area of dating abuse and intimate partner violence. Now, it's important to note there has been some contention over the exact titles and definitional uses of these various terms, as dating abuse and dating violence have been typically used interchangeably, just as relationship abuse, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and domestic abuse have been used interchangeably. Now, given that the focus of my dissertation is on identifying relational red flags in initial romantic encounters, and given that relationship abuse, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and domestic abuse are terms that are universally used to describe individuals who have already progressed to either an intimate relationship and or are living together, the focus on detecting signals relating to violence in my study will remain confined to the aforementioned synonymous areas of just dating abuse and dating violence, because I'm just focused on the initial romantic encounters. This is done to better serve the overall research. And to that end, even less research has been conducted in that area. The lion's share of scholarly work that has been conducted on violence in relationships has focused on dating abuse and domestic violence, which pertains to any two or more people living together regardless of familial or romantic ties, and intimate partner violence, which is reserved for individuals who have already achieved an intimate relationship, okay? Although, again, there has been some contention that dating abuse and dating violence are synonymous labels with intimate partner violence. I understand this is a mouthful. There have been books written on all of these. There's been a lot of research by people in many other fields. So I'm just trying my best to concise this into a few minutes of an answer.
Thank you. So essentially what you're saying is that the focus of your dissertation differs from the other scholarly work out there, correct?
Yes, because further contention, even exists regarding how exactly to define violence in general. While it is any of a leading number of terms of, as we've already said, domestic abuse, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, most scholars seem to agree that these definitions of violence pertain primarily to just physical violence and harm. Now, this is a limited definition, and it is unfortunate, as there are several other forms of violence and abuse that exist, and not just intimate relationships, but emerging relationships, as well as, of course, which extend far beyond just physical violence. So in addition to physical violence, the Center for Relationship Abuse Awareness, they list several other types of abuse seen in dating couples, as well as intimate relationships. The most prominent additional forms of abuse listed by the organization include economic abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and psychological abuse. So again, my study, as it even says in the title of the dissertation, is focused on initial romantic encounters, which is defined as formal or informal first few dates or chance meetings. So you meet someone at the mall or the grocery store, and you bump into them, and he or she seems attractive to you, and you strike up a conversation and you make plans to meet again. Or, as is common for a lot of individuals these days, you meet on dating apps or websites and you connect. So I'm just talking about those first few dates. I am not talking about more established romantic relationships or long-term committed relationships. I wanted to study what are the relational red flags that people notice in these very early stage courtship process that would lead them to believe, hey, it's only been 1 or 2 or 3 dates, and I don't like what I've seen, and I don't want to pursue getting to know him or her anymore. And that is very important, because if it does progress to a deeper relationship and you didn't notice those relational red flags, then of course that can lead to any of a number of things beyond just physical, emotional, or psychological abuse. That of course is the most extreme version, and that is very serious. But even if you're not in a, quote, abusive relationship, you could still be in a very unhappy relationship. There are people who have spent months and years with a partner who did not bring them happiness. Why? Because of the relational red flags that they either didn't notice or chose to ignore, or a combination of both, which again speak to incompatibilities, dissimilarities, violations of what we expected of the appropriate behavior, and so on and so on.
So I think that's an area that really there's a resonance between my work and yours, because a lot of what I focus on based on my lived experience was that, I didn't go through the physical abuse. It was all sort of much more psychologically inclined. So I think it's quite important to look at those more sort of hidden forms of abuse and the risk factors behind that, right? And I think because it's a hell of a lot more confusing to try and navigate abusive relationships, whether that's romantic or familial or otherwise, where there is hidden abuse, because you can imagine if you have bruises or something, that's a physical manifestation of what you're going through. So it's very sort of easy to sort of prove what you're going through, if that makes sense. Whereas psychological, emotional, financial, even, how do you prove that? It's a much more nuanced topic to try and prove and to try and get people to take you seriously. So I think that more of this research is needed, and I think that it's a great thing that you've done.
Thank you. I am just grateful for all the participants and all the honest conversations in the mixed method study I had, and I did my best to try and make it as relatable to individuals, because this is what matters. What would you like to discuss next?
So I think we've talked about how the average person values, the typology of the relational red flags that you found, so the 9 themes and 23 sub-themes. So how about you go through what the most severe relational red flags were?
Sure, let me find, I can do it according to, we can break it down a few ways according to gender. We did notice some gender differences here. So give me one moment. I want to make sure I have all this correct. Okay, so overall, the 9 themes, and again, these may not make sense in just hearing them off the top of the head, but in order to read the work to understand them, they would be, this is just an alphabetical order: deviant behavior, family and social systems, immediate intimacy, lacks financial stability or independence, lacks similarities, lacks or violated compassionate features, romantic others, violated courtship norms, and violated traditional gender roles. Now, those are the 9 major categories, and then within several of them, there are subcategories. So in terms of severity, we did find that I had all the participants, I had them list. It was very simple. I said, please list, according to you, what you feel are the 15 red flags that you have noticed in your own dating experience, and then rate each one in terms of how severe it is. One being the lowest, which was rated as not severe at all, like mildly annoying, but can be tolerated. So it's still a red flag. You're not saying it's not serious, but you're saying, you know what, it's a little annoying, but I can tolerate it. All the way up to level 5, which was extremely severe, okay? And of course, a series of statistical tests were done for all of these beyond just, rating, et cetera, et cetera. But we did find, in terms of severity, the one that was considered the most severe was very clear. That was deviant behavior, okay? That had an average rating of 4.13, meaning out of the 4,000 codes and the several hundreds of participants who were a part of my first study of the two, that it had an average rating well over 4, meaning it was between number 4, which is fairly severe, all the way up to 5, which was extremely severe, okay? So it was between that. And 3 was moderately severe. Moderate, of course, means, kind of average severity, which is why it was the median, the middle. So the average rating for that was 413, and that was for the overall category. Now, I, of course, also had averages for each of the sub-themes. And the 5 major sub-themes of deviant behavior was general/unspecified. That is where it was clear they were describing a deviant behavior, but it wasn't clear which specific one, or they may have just been vague. But it was still clear that they were talking about something that is a deviant behavior, meaning it deviates from the norm, something that the vast majority of people would say is considered, no, the average person should not act like this. And that had a rating of 3.84, which is nearly up close to 4. And that was the lowest of the 5. And then the other sub-themes are alcohol abuse and dependency, that had a rating of 3.86. And then criminality, we see a jump here. That was a rating of 4.37, okay? And then we had drug use and dependency, which was the highest, 4.39. And then violent or abusive, which is 4.23. Now, violent or abusive included any type of violence or abuse, meaning physical, emotional, or psychological. So those were the 5 major areas of what's considered deviant behavior. Now, it's important to note that several of the major categories were over 3 and close to 4 or 5, okay? Such as 7 of the 9 categories had a rating above 3.5 or higher. That means that they were all trending, towards the 4 or 5 range, which of course is considered fairly severe. And of course, 3 is moderate. And again, even 3 is bad, okay? These are red flags. Only you would think that if these weren't serious things, we would have averages in the 1s and 2s. That is not what I saw. None of them were rated, no major category or even any sub-theme had an average rating in the 1s and 2s. I believe the lowest rating of any of these for a major theme was violated courtship norms, and that was 3.23, which even that is between 3 and 4, meaning the average person rated it higher than 3, which is higher than average, higher than the median. So again, there are ones that differ in severity, but what the research has shown is all of these are serious. It doesn't just have to be deviant behavior. It doesn't just have to be criminality or alcohol abuse or drug use. If this is something that is important to your identity, if this is something that you do not want in a romantic partner, it is a serious thing, okay? Now, yes, drug use and these things are very serious matters. I'm not saying they're not, but something as simple as just incompatibility of values, interests, and personality. If you're in a long-term relationship with someone who makes you unhappy, even if they're not physically or emotionally violent, it can still be a very lonely relationship. You can feel isolated from your friends. You could feel as if you're not understood by your partner. And it can be a very emotionally taxing experience. So even in the lack of abuse, these are still very serious things that we do not want in a potential romantic partner, which the research has shown. Again, I'm sorry, I know these are long answers. Academic research, sometimes it's hard to be concise, but I can assure you this is far more concise than reading 200 pages.
Oh, yeah. That's for certain, yeah. Now, we went into the sub-themes of deviant behavior, which is, you know, you think deviant behavior, and you know what that means. But how about we go through some of the other ones, like family and social systems? So what would a relational red flag in that category look like?
Okay. Yes, I actually have a lot of, as my dissertation has, it has a lot of actual quotes from several of the participants to give examples. So it doesn't just have the definition that I came up with, it also explains, oh, these were the examples, this is what we saw. Okay. So we wanted to discuss family and social systems. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Sorry, just give me a moment here. So I'm trying to find the participant examples, okay? All right, so some of the things that people had said were, first, we have something like conflict with family system, okay? Some of the people had said, I've been on a first date where my date elaborated on how racist his immediate family was. That, of course, would be a red flag to them. Another one said, dad and brother didn't like him. Another one said, not liking my family. Another said, they were rude to my family, okay? Now, it's important to note that the conflict with the family system, that this is on either side. It is, they have issues with your family or you have issues with their family, okay? So it's a conflict with either side of the dyad in terms of a family system, because that is still issues with the family system.
Yeah, so I think what I'm getting out of this conversation more and more is that it's really, because, you know, identity largely is self-defined, that red flags, relational red flags, are in the same category because, you know, of course, the things that you, your truth in life, if there's someone who comes along who has an entirely different truth to their life, of course, there's going to be incongruency between the pair of you. And is that a correct assessment in this? Dissimilarities being the major sort of point where relational red flags stem from.
Yes, a lot of it. Okay, the short answer to all of this, when you find a romantic partner, is what is right for you, what is wrong for you. It's whatever you two negotiate. It's whatever makes you two happy. Take, for example, one of the other very serious areas, one of the other 9 major areas is immediate intimacy, okay? Now, what does this mean? This occurs when participants felt the other person was trying to move too quickly by attempting to gain immediate intimacy in either emotional or physical terms. And this did have 3 subgroups. So under immediate intimacy, the first category was general or unspecified. The next was emotional, and then the next was physical, okay? So a common one that showed up in this sub-theme that is mentioned by a lot of people was the other person was, quote, too clingy. Now, that was a little vague, but it was still clear that it was referring to immediate intimacy. Now, it could have referred to physical clinginess or emotional clinginess or both. But since it wasn't clear, it was still grouped under general or unspecified. Whereas other things that were more clear were focused on emotional and physical, okay? Emotional intimacy, you know, making too many long-term plans, wanting them to meet your family, talking about, oh, I believe we're boyfriend, girlfriend now. And it's like, well, we've only been on 1 or 2 dates. For the other person, they're like, I feel that's moving too fast. And then seeking immediate intimacy - physical is, of course, trying to get too physically intimate with the other person, trying to do things that they feel has not been warranted or earned yet in what they feel is an early stage. Now, again, this is all relative, okay? Because let's say one person, again, these are just hypothetical situations. I am by no means saying everyone is like this who fits this. This is just an example. Let's say someone is very young. You are 18 years old. You're in college for the first time. You're just beginning to explore and see the world. And most people at that age, they want to sow their wild oats, as they say. They want to date and explore and find out more of who they are and what they like in a partner. So if they meet someone who is talking about, you know, long-term commitment in marriage, for the average person at 18, that to them is going to be a red flag. It's, whoa, I'm only a teenager. I just started dating you. I mean, you seem nice, but no, I don't want to talk about marriage. That's way too early. For most people, that would be a red flag. Now let's fast forward. I told you, red flags change as we change, okay? Now they don't have to change. For some people, there will always be things core to your identity that are important that will not change. but many other things will as you get older. This is what my research has found. So instead of 18, let's now say the individual is, let's add 15 years. Let's say they're 33, okay? By and large, a majority of people who do wish to settle down and either cohabitate and or fall in love and get married, they typically want to do so on average. Most people would like to do that before their mid 30s, okay? So let's say the individual is now 33, 35, okay? A lot of people feel pressure by that age if they haven't found their partner to do so. They look at social media, they see their friends who for the last 5-10 years are posting baby pictures and engagements. And for a lot of people, they feel like, you know, they've been left behind. They still haven't found their serious romantic partner, their soulmate yet. So now for this person at this age, at 33, 35, let's say they meet someone who they just click with instantly. They find after just the first few dates, they have a strong emotional connection with. They get along really well. For them, the talk of, okay, let's look down the road and begin to talk about long-term goals and potentially marriage, that to them may no longer be a red flag because now they're ready for it. They're no longer 18. They're, 15 to 17 years older, almost twice the age, 18 to now 35. So again, this can differ. Now, this is all highly relative. There are people who get married at 18 and they are happy and they found their soulmate at 18. So for some people, if they have an instant connection, that may not be a red flag if that person is talking about marriage. But by and large, for a majority of people at that young age, that would be a red flag. So again, it does differ by person, but it also differs by age. So for one person, what would be the relational red flag of immediate intimacy / emotional. For another person, it's no, that's not a relational red flag. That's something that I want. I want someone to want to desire me and form a long-term committed relationship. That is not a red flag to me. That is my goal.
Yeah. Back to the category of immediate intimacy. Did we see any sex differences in the severity ratings in that category?
Yes. Let me go to that. Let me find that page. Okay. Yes, we did notice several sex differences in terms of men versus women. So I also categorized the overall percent of all types and the percent of participants reporting each type for both men and women. And so concerning immediate intimacy, we had found, so the percent of participants reporting each type. So out of men, immediate intimacy, this is just the general category, 65% had reported at least experiencing one of the three instances, 65, so roughly 2/3. Whereas women, 77%. So close to 80% of all the women who were surveyed said that they had experienced at least one instance or more of immediate intimacy. That is a significant difference from 2/3 for the men to nearly 80% for the women. Okay, that is a significant difference. And of course, I then break it down based off of emotional versus physical. Okay, so let's talk about physical, because the general stereotype, again, these are stereotypes, but the general pattern that we have found is, by and large, it is seen that, the man chases the woman. Okay, the women are seen as gatekeepers. Okay, especially in terms of physicality. And of course, this goes on to, this speaks to an evolutionary perspective. Men need to procreate the species. And thus it makes sense that the men would want to do that, okay, from an evolutionary perspective. Whereas it also makes sense that women need to be choosy of who their partners are, okay? And that is also supported by evolutionary research. So you would think, hey, men would desire physicality more than women. And that, of course, has been vetted out in the research. So in terms of immediate intimacy - physical, okay, in terms of the men, so men who had reported experiencing this, meaning they had been on a date with someone who they felt was trying to get to a stage of immediate physical intimacy that they did not feel was appropriate or earned, only 26% of men said that they had felt that. And even that is serious, the fact that over a quarter of men had experienced that. So that does debunk the myth that all men, that all the only thing that men want is the physical nature. Now that, of course, is not true, okay? But for women, in terms of immediate intimacy, physical, we found that 54% of women, well over half, have said that they had experienced that. So from 26% of men to 54% of women, more than double the women had experienced this than the men. That is a significant finding, more than double.
Yeah. Another salient sex difference, if I'm not mistaken, was in the lacks financial stability category.
Yes, again, the general belief is men should be providers. Now, this is a traditional belief, and it's not a wrong belief. It's not, none of these are right or wrong. It's whatever each person feels. Some people tend to be more traditional in their beliefs. Other people tend to be more progressive. Okay. And if that's what works for you and your partner, and if you two are happy and no one's getting hurt, then what does it matter if you both choose to be traditional or you both choose to be progressive? Okay. But yes, the traditional belief is that the man is the provider and thus, the breadwinner, and thus he should have financial stability and independence. So generally speaking, women would prefer to find a man to be on, if they're on a first date with someone and the man says things like, oh, I don't own a car, or I live at home with my parents, or I don't have a current job right now, or I don't have a serious job, or I don't have any prospects. Those were a lot of the actual examples we got. So for a high percent of women, they saw that as a red flag. Oh, he or she is older than I think they should be, and they're still living with their parents. I'm sorry, he is, excuse me. So for the women, they say he is still living with his parents, and or he's not in college, and or he doesn't have any career ambitions. So in terms of the percentages, we found lacks financial stability or independence. That didn't have a sub-theme, but we did find that that was more severe for women, especially in the severity rating, okay? So the severity rating for men, in terms of did they feel the woman had any financial stability or independence, that was exactly at 3. That was 3.00, so that was exactly at the median. Now, that does not mean it wasn't serious, but it was mid-range in terms of severity. The women, however, rated it. They rated if their partner did not have financial stability or independence, they rated that as a 3.95, basically a 4, okay, which is seen as pretty severe, okay, highly severe. And of course, 5 is extremely severe, which is the worst. So we did see an entire point difference, okay, from 3 to 4, an entire measurement, and that actually is a significant difference. So I hope that makes sense.
That does. Yes. Now, finally on this point, am I correct in saying that the lacks or violated compassionate features theme, wasn't that equally distributed between the two sexes?
Lacks or violate? Yes. Men, so okay, in terms of, so we had the percent of participants reporting each type. So out of a 100% of men, and then separately 100% of women, how many of them had said that they had experienced this one or more times? This was among the highest for both genders. 88% of men said they had experienced this, and 89.1% of women. Only a 1.1% difference. So technically it is more, but that's negligible. That's basically the same. So in terms of what was meant by lacks or violated compassionate features, okay, that is something that had been studied. That was a term that had been used, and we are talking about someone who is seen as things like, are they warm? Are they kind? Are they considerate? Again, do they have what are called these compassionate features that we want to see in a partner? Okay, things that, again, the average person would expect to see within their partner. And these are things that, again, the vast majority of people, look, there's 8 billion people on Earth, everyone is different. I'm sure there are some people who are very stoic and do not, exhibit a lot of emotion, and maybe they prefer to have that in a partner. But even then, they still want a type of connection. So it can still be argued that they are still looking for some type of interpersonal connection, okay? Very few people in this world are true, what we call misanthropes, people who just hate humanity and don't desire any type of connection. It has been definitively proven through research in multiple social scientific fields that we as human beings are social creatures. It has been definitively proven that the need to belong is an inherent element of humanity. We want to form connections with others. And of course, more important than that, we want to form connections with others that we feel are compassionate and have these elements of the compassionate behavior. So that is important that we find someone that has that. So someone that violates that that of course would be very serious to us, okay? So some of the primary features of this are examples of caring, trustworthy, honest, kind, a good listener, selfless, respectful, they're open, they're non-judgmental, they're gentle, and they're sincere, okay? And so this actually comes from the work of Fair and Sprecher. They called it their compassionate features. And I had found that when these features are lacking or violated, such as the opposite of that, instead of caring, they're uncaring. Instead of trustworthy, they're untrustworthy. Instead of honest, they're dishonest. Instead of kind, they're unkind, and so on. When we see those are red flags. So it's the absence of the compassionate feature. It's this person is not being caring, they're being uncaring. That to me is a red flag, says the person. And of course would say most people.
Yeah, and that makes sense because, in the sort of archetypal romantic partner, those are things that, you want, because who the hell wants to be with, a person who won't, care about them, right?
Yes. Now, again, there's exception to these. Out of a few of those qualities, there may be people who, so one of them is something like, saying that the other person is stubborn. Sometimes there are people who are just stubborn and they enjoy being with another stubborn person, okay? As I said before, there are some couples who like to argue. They enjoy a healthy sense of debate. Now, as long as that does not turn violent or emotionally abusive, there is nothing wrong with having a healthy civil debate with your partner. So there are some people who are drawn to that. We are social creatures, and it's been definitively proven that we do want to connect with others, okay? Now, some people have a higher tolerance and a higher, they're more extroverted. They want to connect with as many people as possible. Other people are more introverted. But we still want to form connections, lasting relationships through friendships, through romantic relationships, through professional collegial with our colleagues. These things matter. And when these are, when they violate these, especially in someone we do want as a romantic partner, which is what this work is, that can be frustrating. No one wants to date someone that is lacking these compassionate features.
Yeah, and I think the next question here is pretty self-explanatory. I think you've covered it. Why it's important to be perceptive of relational red flags. Now, I think it's just because, if you're not perceptive of them and you just, you're not aligned ideologically or whatever with a potential partner, I think you're just setting yourself up for a relationship that's not going to generate happiness for either of you. Would I be correct in that assumption?
Are they noticed or are they ignored? Those are two different things. Yeah. Sometimes we may not notice things about someone. It may be so subtle or it may be so quick that we don't notice it until we get to know them more. Then we finally see what are these red flags, these relational red flags for the first time. Versus ignored is you think, oh, this is just a minor relational red flag. This is something that I can endure. And yet over time you find, I wasn't being honest with myself. It's not something I can endure. And I think nearly all of us, if we're being honest, have experienced that. If you've been on enough dates with people, if you're old enough as an adult and you've been on a few distinct dates and you've formed some romantic relationships, you have found, there have been times where I thought I could tolerate this. But as you get older, that's what I'm saying. You learn more about yourself and you learn more about, I thought I was comfortable with this, but I am not. That wasn't a red flag when I was 18, but it is now that I'm 22 or what have you. So red flags can absolutely change as you get older, but some, of course, may not. Someone may always have the tenet of, I do not want to date someone who drinks alcohol. Oh, not even one drink a week? No, I want a teetotaler. There are many people who feel that way. That may be due to 1,000 reasons. It may be due to, of course, they had previous experience with people who are alcoholics, or maybe they had someone in their own family. But for them, that is a serious issue. It's no, I do not want alcohol in my home. So even just someone who is a reasonable social drinker that is not an alcoholic in any way, shape, or form, to the other person, they are not what's called a teetotaler, someone who fully abstains from alcohol. So even a social responsible drinker, someone who is not an alcoholic, that would still be a red flag to the other person, okay? So again, all of these are what we identify within ourselves as we get older, and some of them will always be things. You can even know at a young age what you for sure inherently like and do not like. So yes, it is important that we perceive these. And then just lastly on this issue is the role the family system plays, as my research has also shown. People do not endure relational red flags on their own. While some may choose to work through the process by themselves, most, however, will not and will instead seek assistance from those they know and trust the most, such as their family and friends, their family system and or their social network. And these people play a vital role in their detecting and processing of relational red flags. If you've been in enough relationships with someone and your friends have met these people, there have been many times where if you are honest with your friends and they're honest with you and you say, hey, tell me, what do you think of John or what do you think of Kelly? And they will, and if they're being honest, they'll say, hey, I don't like him or her because of this. Our friends and family help us see things that we can't see, okay? Things that we're like, oh, wow, I hadn't seen it from that perspective. And you get to start to think about that more and you realize, wow, I think that is a red flag. Thank you. So the role our family system and social network plays is also important in helping us be perceptive to noticing these relational red flags.
And on that note, I think you highlight a real importance of having some sort of support structures there to help you perceive things that otherwise would go unnoticed or ignored, right? You said in your dissertation that action cannot take place if the most common relational red flags are not known. So I suppose, though you might personally not be aware of certain things, the presence of friends or family members would, help in identifying those and make you leave a dysfunctional relationship, let's say, because then you're aware of those relational red flags.
Yes, and it has to be with a family or friend who knows you well, of course. If it's just a casual friend, they may not know you, and then which means they may not know what would be a red flag for you. So the closer the relationship is between the individual and their family member or friend, the more successful that family member or friend will be in aiding the individual in the detection and processing of these relational red flags. The quality of the relationship being relied on matters. It does. The more intimate and close the primary individual is to their family member or friend, the more accurate the other person will be in knowing how incompatible or dissimilar the primary individual's new dating interest is for them, given that the close family member or friend often has a strong and deep relational history with the primary individual. So it's not just that it is a family member or friend. If it's a family member or friend who you feel you're not close to and who doesn't know you well, they most likely will not be able to give you the best advice compared to one who does know you well and one that you do feel close to.
And on that note, I think it highlights the proclivity we see in domestic abuse cases is that typically the abuser will sort of systematically cut off support structures from the victim's life, like friends or family, and sort of prohibit them from talking to them or visiting them and things like that. So I think it makes sense, given this context, that a close friend or a close family member can see things that you might not be able to pick up on. So I think it would make sense for the abuser to sort of sever that tie so that the victim is essentially left blind.
Yes, and that part has been studied a lot in what's called intimate partner violence. But we're speaking more now. Now we're speaking about more established relationships. Whereas this work could absolutely be extended to established romantic relationships, and this could be extended to a number of different things. But I just wanted to lay the foundation in how things begin, and how they begin are these initial romantic encounters. So while I do agree with you, I do think it's important that our listeners and readers understand that the chance of someone you've only been on one or two dates with, the chance that they would have the power to cut you off from your family is fairly unrealistic. So that is not something that we would not see too often. Has it ever happened? I'm not sure, maybe. But the fact that someone that you've only seen once or twice, that you would give them that much power, that speaks to a much deeper relationship than just a single time or two, okay? And that, of course, is very severe. If you allow that person, after only meeting you once or twice, to have that type of power over you, that is a serious relational red flag. And you, of course, need to do your best if they're controlling who you can and can't talk to. And again, any type of control of that level is bad, whether it's in a one or two first dates or a 6-year marriage. But we typically are able to avoid that more, to not even get to that stage is what I'm saying, because most people are not going to give someone they've only met once or twice that type of power. Okay, most people are not going to have, I guess it speaks to a few things. We're making some generalizations here, but most people are not going to have basically that very low level of self-esteem And that is true. We see that people who are more susceptible to having people control them more is that they unfortunately have a very low self-worth, which the other person then manipulates and takes advantage of. Which, and again, a lot of research has been done on these areas, and again, in more established relationships. But I am just focusing on the initial levels of courtship, the first few dates. So just to try and give it in a nutshell, the idea that someone would have the power to cut you off from your family after 1 or 2 dates, I would say that that is largely not an issue for a vast majority of people.
Sure. And I think that sort of behavior would constitute abuse, which might be why, in the sub-theme of violent or abusive, why we saw the rating of 4.23, why that was so high, because obviously you don't want that, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes, people did see these signs, okay? Yeah, they did note that, again, they had experienced one or more of these occasions, and that did get the highest rating, the violent or abusive, which of course had the various other sub-themes of physical versus emotional versus, other things like that. But abuse is still abuse. I don't want to say that one is less severe than the other, because, I guess other people can debate that, but I won't. Physical abuse is just as serious as emotional abuse. While someone may not have the physical scars, that doesn't mean that it didn't take in a very emotional toll on them. Here's the thing. Let's just talk about therapy. People seeking help with their mental health. That is a very real thing, and that should be encouraged. And prior to recently, there's been a large stigma for people to seek professional help through counseling and other avenues. And that is wrong. There should not be a stigma on that. And by and large, thankfully, we're getting more progressive and people are understanding that there's nothing wrong with seeking help and talking to a professional psychiatrist or psychologist about any type of trauma or issues you have, okay? So what am I talking about? How am I connecting this? I am saying that a lot of people have experienced trauma. A lot of people are trying to work through things in their life. A lot of people have had instances of emotional abuse. The average person has not been physically assaulted many times in their life. Whereas the average person, it can be said, as you get older and have other relationships, sadly, we do bear the scars of mental and emotional abuse. So I am not saying physical abuse is not serious. It absolutely is. But what I am saying is that emotional and mental abuse is just as serious, which unfortunately a lot of people tend to overlook because, oh, you don't have scars? Well, and some people take this ridiculous, outdated belief of, well, just tough it out, be tough. That is a very closed-minded way of not assisting someone in dealing with their trauma.
Yeah, and I think that it's, like I said previously, a big tenet of the Big Boys Can't Cry campaign is sort of breaking that stigma, because I think males are particularly affected by this. It's sort of, it's the old adage of boys don't cry, right? It's like, you just have to show no emotion whatsoever and be utterly stoic. And, if you show any emotion, you're weak. And I think it's time to dispel that notion, and also to dispel the notion that the only type of abuse is physical, because that's, not true whatsoever.
Yes, men are human beings too. And this highly conservative belief that men need to be stoic and they need to bottle up their emotions, that has been definitively proven as unhealthy and a very incorrect way of thinking. Anyone who is honest with themselves and not burying their head in their sand and just being backward thinking would admit, it's important that we move forward. It's important that we understand that there is no shame in being in tune with your emotions. And sadly, people are labeled in some cultures, or people who are just inconsiderate label people as very derogatory, hurtful terms like a sissy or a big baby, or many other countless terms that are even more hurtful that I would never say. But there's nothing wrong with being in tune with your emotions, and men can seek mental wellness just as much as women. And I am all for everyone living a happy, healthy life. Look, as long as you're not hurting the other person, do what works for you, do what works with you and your partner, and live a happy life, okay? That's all that matters. Negotiate with what works best with you and your partner, and as long as it's not emotionally or physically destructive, then that is fine.
I think that's a great message, Dr. White, and I think with that we're going to take a 5-minute break if you'd like.
All right, I appreciate it.
All right.
If we
Welcome back. Now, the framework that your dissertation revolved around, correct me if I'm wrong, was signal detection theory. Could you outline that for us, please?
Yes, there were multiple scientific studies that were the basis of this. As I briefly said at the beginning, I know we've covered a lot since then, but there are various things such as costly signaling theory, expectancy violation theory, dating abuse and violence, similarities and dissimilarities, error management theory, and fatal attraction. But yes, the main academic lens that this was looked through, the entire basis that this clearly fits into is what's called signal detection theory, or SDT, which dates back to the 60s, I believe. So what is signal detection theory? I'm going to try and be concise, but there have been entire books written on this, and of all the theories that this relational red flags research builds upon, the most important is, yes, signal detection theory. What is that? It's the backbone because relational red flags are signals. They are signals that we need to notice, signals that protect us and keep us safe. These relational red flags are signals that will help steer us towards those who do not display these signals that we label as undesirable qualities, these things that we would not want in a potential romantic partner. So signals are important, and they can be used in a wide variety of ways depending on their application. Signals are primarily important because they warn of potentially impending doom that may ensue if the signal goes unheeded, regardless of how strong or weak it may be. So signal detection theory dates back to the 1960s by Green and Sweats. It's been applied in the social sciences in a number of different ways. So simply put, what is a signal? Okay, a signal is any event in which some living system transmits a message during the course of its actions or behavior. That is from Kaufman. Now, simply put, a signal can be any behavior which serves as a display, or even more generally, anything that conveys information. Now, I know that sounds a little vague. Dawkins and Krebs defined it as, quote, anything that acts as an incitement to action. I particularly like that definition. This definition is perfect for use in romantic relational research because, for example, in the course of a first date, if one person acts hostile, it would be beneficial for the other person to detect these hostile signals and act on them by making decisions that ensure the signal receiver's safety. So to try and wrap this up, how do signals work? Kaufman outlined that when a signal is sent, it can result in one of three different trajectories, depending on the characteristics of the stimulus, meaning how weak or strong the signal is, as well as the presence, intensity, and degree of any background stimulation or interference, i.e. noise, and the physical and psychological states of the detector or receiver. So what are these three signal trajectories? One, a signal is sent but is beyond the receiver's ability to receive it. Two, a signal is sent and is able to be received, but it is ignored or goes unnoticed by the receiver. And three, a signal is sent, it is able to be received, and the receiver recognizes the signal's presence. That is from Kaufman's research. Now, I applied that to my research, and I explained it in how that would fit these signal trajectories in initial romantic encounters. So let's explain that. So one, a signal is sent, but is beyond the receiver's ability to receive it. So an example in my work would be your date flirts with someone else out of view of you. They're in a different part of the restaurant. They're flirting with someone else. I think nearly everyone would agree that you're on a date with that person, and yet they're showing romantic interest to someone else. Pretty much everyone would consider that disrespectful and a red flag. But notice, a signal is sent, but is beyond the receiver's ability to receive it. They're at the bar flirting with the person, whereas you're in a different part of the restaurant and cannot see them. So the signal is still happening, it's just imperceptible to you. You cannot notice it. Next, a signal is sent and it is able to be received, but it is ignored or goes unnoticed. So an example would be, your date makes a quick passive-aggressive remark that goes unnoticed. Perhaps you're listening to the waiter list out the specials that night, and your date has a quick passive-aggressive remark, and you either don't hear it, it goes unnoticed, or you just ignore it because you're focusing on the waiter giving the specials. So next, the last one, a signal is sent and it is able to be received, and the receiver does recognize the signal's presence. So an example would be, You see your date being rude to the waiter while you're placing the order. You notice it. You're like, oh, that's not good. I don't want that to be a quality that I want in my partner. So simply put, that's just a very quick definition on what has been a lot of work by many people done on signal detection theory, signal trajectories, and then lastly, how I hopefully applied it to my research, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned the difference between a signal being ignored and going unnoticed. Now, I think you speak in your dissertation that it doesn't. The methodology of what constitutes a miss, which is a signal that's not received by after being transmitted. It doesn't really matter the methodology because the end effect is the same. That it's a miss. But could you clarify the difference between a signal being a miss by means of being going unnoticed rather than being ignored?
The difference, I'm sorry?
Yes.
Oh, I guess the difference is just how in tune someone, well, it depends on a few things. It can be how well that person knows themselves. If they are, again, our red flags change throughout our life. Maybe we hadn't noticed that was, so it goes unnoticed. I'm sorry, ignored, excuse me. It goes ignored because maybe we think, that's not a big deal. I think I can, you basically downplay it. You're like, I think I can handle that. Or it's not necessarily downplayed. You just perceive it to be inconsequential. So it's not that you're saying, oh, I can deal with it. It's you're saying, well, I feel that's minor. You know what? That's not even something that needs to be further studied. Or a signal can also be missed, not just because of your own judgment, your own assessment of it, but just simply due to noise. What's called internal and external. External is simple. Let's say you're at a loud restaurant, or let's say you're in public at a public park and there's children playing and screaming and there's just a lot going on, or there's construction in the background. So a lot of things could lead to the signal not being noticed. It may not be the fault of the person, or it may be the lack of them realizing what is a red flag for them at that stage in their life or not. So there's a lot of reasons for this. There is hardly a universal catch-all definition that will fit everybody in every instance. But what we have found is there are large-scale categories of patterns that do exist that, if understood, will help a vast majority of people. And that is what I've studied, and that is what my research has found.
Right. On the topic of noise, you differentiate between internal and external noise. Am I correct in the presumption that external noise is any phenomena outside of the self? So anything that might hinder your ability to concentrate or something like that by mere virtue of taking your attention away from, whether it be your partner's speech or paralinguistic features, so body language or things like that. So like a crowded restaurant, let's say.
Yes. Noise. So internal noise is your cognitive processes. And these can be good or bad. Let's say you're stressed. You say you had a really hard day at work and you're not able to focus on your date. That could be internal noise. Internal noise could also be something as simple as the beating of your own heart, if it's distracting enough to you. And I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, have been in situations in life where we're scared, we feel threatened. And sometimes the beating of our own heart feels so loud, we feel like it's going to burst out of our chest. And that's all we hear. And we focus on that. So internal noise could also be, quote, labeled as good. It's not just bad. It's not just stressors. Internal noise can also be, let's say you're at school, let's say you're in college, and it's your birthday, and your dad promised you he's going to buy you a new car for your birthday, And so all day long, you're just thinking about getting this brand new car. You can't focus on your studies. You can't focus on whatever. That is internal noise, because it's keeping you from, it's noise. It's keeping you from focusing on what the professor is saying, or even if you're on a date, you're excited about something else, or let's say you're just really excited about your date. There's countless examples of these. So you're so happy to be here with this person. You match with them on social media, on a dating app, and you're so excited to be with them. You think he or she is the one early on. You're very excited. And this clouds your cognitive processes because you're unable to focus on what he or she is saying because you're just so excited about being there. You're not able to cut through the noise and live in the moment. So noise can be both labeled as, positive or negative, or good or bad. So does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think the summary of that would be, regardless of whether it's good or bad noise. It's noise is that which makes the reception of signals more difficult, or that you miss signals entirely. Is that correct?
Noise and uncertainty lead us to not detect signals as much. Not all signals are detected. Some are, while others are not. Whether a signal is detected, a lot of it has to do with noise and uncertainty, which, of course, this goes back to Green and Sweat's, their work. Every day we interact with others, and in doing so, we make countless decisions when we engage in these interactions. And we do this based on the information we receive. This information is often presented to us in the form of signals given by the person with whom we're communicating. However, we rarely have every possible piece of information available concerning a decision when we must make that decision. Because of this, signal detection theory states that our decision-making processes occur in the presence of some level of uncertainty. Now, we must also make these decisions despite this uncertainty, while simultaneously attempting to accurately detect any and all signals amidst the presence of noise. Okay, which is any type of interference. Noise is interference. It could be physical, it could be mental, it could be auditory, it could be visual. There's visual, things get in your face. So noise is not just the literal sound, it's any type of interference. It can be a physical barrier, it can be other things that get in the way. So, and these are real things. And imagine if you're dealing with both physical and, let's say you're dealing with both internal and external noise at the same time. Then it's going to be even harder for you to notice these signals when you're on a first date or first few initial romantic encounters. So these are things that we need to try to overcome in order to be able to best notice signals, these relational red flags.
Sure, and the one component of the noise and uncertainty dyad is the uncertainty, and I think that highlights the importance of applying signal detection theory to initial romantic encounters, because, you know, it's like the adage goes, you fall in love, which is, you know, that's a whole load of uncertainty, right? You don't know what's you know, going to happen when you meet someone new. And so I think that it just makes sense to use SDT in studying these initial romantic encounters. Because the uncertainty is heightened, right? Because it's like the venture of a romantic interest in someone, that's itself is predicated on uncertainty that might be increased uncertainty that would be present in any other social scenario.
Yes, because we don't know anything about this person. Yep. Okay, yes, you may have made a judgment based off a social media profile or a dating profile, but these dating profiles, they cannot say the full depth of who you are. And a lot of people write them very vaguely. And most importantly, if we're being honest, a lot of people write their dating profiles to be highly preferential to their best qualities, which again makes sense. I don't blame people for that. You typically don't want to say all your baggage on a first date, because guess what? That in and of itself is a red flag. If you go on a first date with someone and all they're doing is just airing out their own dirty laundry, while I personally would appreciate the honesty of that, I would still recognize it as a relational red flag, and most people would too. It's like, whoa, because that is an attempt at immediate intimacy - emotional. Self-disclosures are the key component in interpersonal communication of how we grow close to someone else, through self-disclosure, by telling the truths of our lives. And the closer you get to know someone across time, and the quantity and quality of that time, that is what builds these deeper emotional connections. So it's interesting. As we get to know someone, we do want them to share parts of themselves, but we want them to do it in whatever we deem to be an appropriate manner of time. Now, everyone is different, as I told you earlier. Some people may want to get emotionally close to someone earlier. Others may want to do it across time. Look, if two people who are both in a hurry to settle down meet each other and they're compatible and they're happy, then that is not moving too fast. You always hear people complain of things like, oh, I felt he or she was moving too fast, or he or she is moving too slow. Now, I'm not trying to discredit those, because those are real things. But fast or slow is subjective depending on the people. Again, if you're at a young age, you're not ready to settle down, that to you will be moving too fast. But if you're much older and you are ready to settle down, and you meet someone who has a high degree of similarities and compatibility, then if they also want to move, quote, fast, then that's not moving fast for either of you. That is moving at an appropriate speed that both of you are comfortable with. Whereas other people would see it as, oh my God, he only knew her for 3 months and they already got married within 3 months. That's fast. Well, it wasn't for them. It worked for them. Okay. So there's exceptions to all of these, but on our dating apps and these sites, we often give our best selves, which makes sense. We don't want to air our dirty laundry. And if we begin to share too much of ourselves too quickly, that is an attempt at immediate intimacy dash emotional, because we are trying to form these emotional connections with someone. And to lay all of that onto someone so early on, the average person is going to be detected of that, hopefully, and realize, I don't want that. This person is just vomiting emotionally their lives at me. And I feel that they're trying to get too close too quickly. So I understand the need to give our best selves online, but the good news is that most of us realize that. Most of us realize that these dating apps, we're trying to give our best self, which is understood. There was an old joke a comedian had that in the first few dates with someone, you don't really meet that person. You meet that person's representative. That means you meet their best self. And then as you get to know someone deeper and deeper, you get to learn more about who they truly are. Which, to wrap all this up, that is why these relational red flags are important. Because by and large, on average, most people try and give their best self. They try and show their best behavior. They try and show their best possible selves in these initial romantic encounters, in these first few dates. And that's not your real self. You are not your best self every second of every day for a 30, 40-year marriage or a 30, 40-year cohabitated long-term relationship. We have our good days and bad days. And part of understanding these red flags is knowing that when their real self shines through, when these red flags shine through, are they things you can deal with, meaning they're not relational red flags, or are they things you think you can't deal with? They're signals, they're relational red flags that you should heed and hopefully discontinue seeing that person if you feel you cannot overcome these.
Going back to the issue of noise, internal noise specifically struck a chord with me because I think for viewers listening at home, perhaps they have or have not listened to read my initial blog post, which I know that I've shared with you, Dr. White, and you'll know that I went through a lot of emotional and psychological turmoil with my stepfather that I lived with for a period of 2 years, and I think that when my parents separated, I was going through so many different emotions, and I think that all of that internal noise made me not perceptive whatsoever to, the perhaps glaringly obvious relational red flags that the signals that my stepfather was exhibiting that perhaps, I was shielded from for a long time by my mother, let's say, because she sort of acted as the intermediary between him and I. And I think, if I I was very young at the time, I was around 12, 13. But my point is that perhaps if I was better educated on this, I would have been able to navigate that a little bit better, and I wouldn't have, had to gone through all the, hurt that I had to.
Yes. Are you asking, can my work be applied to these other fields?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I had mentioned towards the end of my dissertation that most importantly is that the future research into relational red flags should expand its focus beyond initial romantic encounters. I just wanted to lay a foundation because when people hear the phrase red flag, which is why I chose that term, it's the pop culture term that everyone uses in terms of dating, in terms of romance. And I changed it to the more academic relational red flags, as we already described. But absolutely, while they may be most appropriate and relevant in the setting of initial romantic encounters, this is only the beginning of the scholastic inquiry that should follow regarding this line of research. Relational red flags are not exclusive to initial romantic encounters inherent to the early stages of the courtship process. The increased study of relational red flags should include how they are detected, labeled, handled, and overall conceptualized in various other aspects of interpersonal communication. So how relational red flags operate in interpersonal reactions beyond just developing romantic relationships should be considered. This could include, but is not limited to, the study of relational red flags in friendships, professional relationships, work relationships, acquaintanceships, okay? And in terms of family systems, you absolutely can relate it to that. But there has also been a lot of work done by a lot of other people on research into the family systems and the family dynamic. There's been a lot of well-rounded research into family communication and in terms of dealing with abusive family members. But yes, just the idea of noticing these things among others, you can absolutely apply it. I just wanted to lay a foundation that could be built upon. No dissertation or no scholastic work of any kind can wholly define any one field. It's only just one piece. And I hope that that's what I achieved.
Yeah, well, I think that okay, so we've said why it's important to be perceptive of red flags, and we've said how perhaps red flags are ignored or go unnoticed. So then, how can one become more perceptive towards them? So how do you, as an individual, navigate both internal and external noise so that you can, perhaps open yourself up to receiving signals that you otherwise wouldn't?
I think it goes back to what we discussed, the family system. People do not endure these on our own. We need to have conversations with people that we know and love and trust, and people that know us well. And it's a combination of a lot of things. When we study human beings, there's no short answer for anything. There's no blanket statement. I wish there was. Life would be a whole heck of a lot easier if there were these universal truths. But human beings vary greatly. Now, again, there are generalized behaviors that we have noticed, these patterns, and that is what I'm advocating for. Things that a lot of other colleagues and people in the social sciences, of course, advocate the same, which is talk to your loved ones, talk to your family system, your friends and family, people who know you well, have honest conversations with them. They will help you. Now, that is difficult for some people, having these honest talks about our love lives with our friends and family. Now, for some people, that's not hard. That's easy. But I want everyone to live happy and healthy lives. And so I encourage those who may not be comfortable having those talks to do their best to understand that it's for their greater good, so that their loved ones care for them and that they can help them understand, oh, you're dating this new person and they're doing these things. Well, in all the time I've known you, I feel that this would be a relational red flag for you. And that can open our eyes to realize, wow, you know what? A fresh pair of eyes is important, okay? No matter how emotionally intelligent or cognitively intelligent someone is, we still miss things. We are people. We are human beings. No one is perfect. We make mistakes. And so it's always good to have a fresh pair of eyes, people who know and love and trust us, and who we know and love and trust, to give us their evaluation. So a lot of it is that, and a lot of it also goes back to knowing yourself and knowing what works for you. And sadly, a lot of people haven't overcome that hurdle. A lot of people are either still young, trying to understand your teens and 20s. A major part of that stage of life, 18 to 25 to 30, is still discovering yourself. For most adults, that's when you're out in the world for the first time. You typically live with your parent or legal guardian your first 18 or so years, but it's after those years that follow that you get to explore the world, explore more about yourself, and you get to find your identity. So it may be difficult for people to understand what are their relational red flags when they haven't gotten to know themselves very well. And I can certainly appreciate and understand that. But I'm just saying that until they know and understand themselves, they may have trouble navigating these waters. So I guess the short answer is, when you're 18, you don't have all the answers.
Yeah. Well,
Now, at no age do you have all the answers. That's not to say at 28 or 38, but I would like to think as we get older, we do have more of the answers.
Yeah, and I think the answers come with self-discovery, right? Because it's like the ever, salient question of what's the meaning of life, and it's like, well, it's whatever the hell you want it to be, right? And it's like it takes a lifetime to discover what the hell you want to be or who you are even. And I think, like you say, there'll never be a point where you know everything, but as you have more experiences in life and as you get older and hopefully a little bit wiser, you can figure some things out, let's say.
Yeah. And just to go back to repeat again, there are some things that will never change.
Yeah.
There are some things that are core to someone's identity that even as a young adult at 18, 19, 20, will always be important to you. So relational red flags can change across your lifespan, and many of them do change, but I am by no means saying that all relational red flags change. Not at all. There are several that are core to your identity that will remain so, and that is great, because that means you already have pieces of the puzzle. You already have core pieces of the puzzle of who you are figured out, and that is a beautiful thing.
I agree, yeah, and I think that's a good message to send to any listeners out there. Yeah, it's a journey of discovery, but maybe where you are right now, you've discovered some parts of the puzzle, and that's always very endearing to hear. Now,
I hope so.
Yeah. How about we talk about some hypothetical outcomes of not noticing red flags, relational red flags. So what? Because within domestic abuse specifically, we know that dysfunctional behaviors compound over time, right? So it's like nothing ever starts out fully. Abuse never starts out fully formed. It's like there's a instance, and then if you don't react to that properly, or you don't work through that with your partner, it can compound over time and it gets worse. So what I'm wondering is, do you have any sort of examples of how a red flag going unnoticed at one point can lead to an escalated behavior in the future?
I mean, I guess it depends on the major category and subcategory. I mean, anything can escalate. Now, this by no means, again, all of this is generalization.
Yeah.
But for the average person who doesn't have a short temper or abusive tendencies, I guess ignoring these red flags will just lead to unhappiness. It'll just lead to, at the very least, a mild annoyance. But I would still think over time that mild annoyance, it's not going away. It's going to grow, and it'll be a severe annoyance. Still an annoyance, but it's still just going to grind on you. Now, again, it may not always coincide with, well, now I get angry and violent. There are a lot of people who have no violent bone in their body. There are people who are very good at dealing with their emotions, but it's still just a level of unhappiness. So, and how that unhappiness manifests. So it may just, for most people, the short answer is, what could these lead to? A waste of time, a waste of money, a waste of energy and resources and things that are very valuable. We work hard for our time and money. And we don't want to chauffeur someone around or always be buying meals or always have to tolerate these little disrespectful grievances. So that, I guess, would be the generalized answer for most of these things. Now, again, everyone is different based off their personality type, but that would be the large scale things that most people would experience.
Sure. So I guess what I'm getting from that is that we ought to sort of separate out sort of the trajectory of, let's say, a red flag going unaddressed, which would just, I guess you'd say that you just, the person on the receiving end of that would just have their resentment bottle up over time, right? Because they're not addressing it and they're not getting out of the relationship. Whereas in an abusive dynamic, it's rather that it's not resentment, it's that you are, actively being abused, and it gets worse over time. But with relational red flags in general, we know that most of them don't lead to this abuse, but what they do lead to, would I be correct in saying that they just lead to an increase in resentment over time, if unaddressed?
If the person still wants to continue a relationship with that person. So at this point, we're saying they are aware of these red flags and they're not dealing with them.
Yep.
So if they're not dealing with them, then a few things could be happening. It could lead to resentment. They also could just be in denial. They could be lying to themselves. And if they're lying to themselves, there may not be a resentment that's too overt because they don't see it. They're in denial. Yeah. But for those that are cognizant of it, it could lead to, unhappiness, resentment. It could lead to a lot of things, but it's certainly nothing that we would want in a healthy, stable relationship. None of these things are good, no matter what it leads to.
Yeah. Now, I noticed that in your dissertation, you speak of males being more prone to perceiving false positives.
Yes, the concept of a false positive. Now, this work has been done by many people. I didn't coin this or anything, but my dissertation did support this work, which had found that. So to try and reiterate, I want to make sure I always get this to the right words, because especially when I'm quoting the work of others. Yeah. So men have what's called a signal detection issue, okay? This is called error management theory, okay, which is the work of Hazelton and Buss and Hazelton and Nettle. This concept illustrates why men typically tend to incorrectly perceive women as being more romantically open and available than they actually are. This is due to a signal detection problem. There's two types of distinct errors that occur that we must consider and manage when attempting to detect the presence of a signal. such as a false positive or a false negative, okay? Now, because these signals and other related cues are unfortunately sometimes ambiguous and subtle, errors are inevitable. False positives and false negatives are going to happen. This relates back to the issue of hits and misses we briefly discussed earlier. So sometimes a person perceives there is a signal where there is none. That is a false positive. Other times a signal is sent and goes unnoticed, as the receiver is under the understanding that no such signal had been sent, i.e. this is a false positive. False negative. I am so sorry. So just to reiterate, sometimes a signal is sent and the person, it goes unnoticed. That is a false negative, okay? Because a person believes that there is no such signal. So believing that there is a signal where there is none is a false positive, and not noticing one is a false negative. I apologize. I hope that makes sense.
That's okay.
So false positives are more commonly called also false alarms, while a false negative is also called a miss, okay? Both are errors in detection, since they did not lead to a successful detection of a signal, otherwise known as a hit, okay? So a fourth and final type of detection response would be if the receiver believes no signal is being sent, when indeed no signal is actually being sent. This is known as a correct rejection, okay? Now that we just have that basic understanding out of the way, evolutionary theorists, and this is the work of a lot of many other people, Manner and Nerberg and Kenrick and Schaller, they argue that this is a bias that can be predicted to regularly occur, which is men will typically tend to err on the side of caution by choosing the less costly error, which is perceiving romantic interest where there is none. This often results in men becoming more physical in their affection, since they believe the woman is displaying romantic interest. As these evolutionary theorists have shown, this support is an important difference among the genders, that men are more receptive to, focused on, and engaging in sexual activity than women. Indeed, it has been well researched and consistently shown across numerous studies that men are, 1, on average, more desiring of sex, 2, more open to the possibility of sex, and 3, are more ready to have sex at a much faster rate than women. So take these findings, for example, they will support the following suppositions. Men are predominantly perceived by both genders as being more focused on sex and more geared towards obtaining sex. One study found that both sexes identified communication strategies targeted at obtaining sex as more typical of men, and strategies aimed at avoiding sex as more typical of women. That's from Mercer and Cohn. So what is all of this saying? It's saying that from an evolutionary perspective, it is actually to a man's benefit to perceive that there is more romantic interest where there is not one. Why is it to their benefit from an evolutionary perspective? Because if a man misses a signal that is being sent, meaning let's say a woman is interested and they perceive there is no signal, okay, that is costly. Why? Because it can prevent them from procreating the species. And from an evolutionary perspective, the whole point of every species is to continue to live on, to pass on the genes to every subsequent generation. No species wants to die out. So from an evolutionary perspective, and again, this is the work of many others, it is better for a man to believe that there is romantic interest where there is none. And what my work has done is it further validates this in terms of what are seen as relational red flags and what men had seen as them versus what women had seen as them, okay? Which is, as we had already discussed, more than twice as many women as men, 26% compared to, I believe, 54% of the women had said that they had experienced an immediate intimacy dash physical on a first few dates, okay? Now, you may believe for women, you may believe, wait, only just over half of the women had experienced this? Well, keep in mind, we're only talking about initial romantic encounters. So we're talking about the first, second, maybe even third date. So the first few dates, that is remarkable that over half the women had said, hey, these men tried to be physical with me, okay? Again, we're not talking about a more established relationship or two people that have agreed to enter into a more formal, courtship. We're just talking about a first or second date. So the fact that the majority of women had said, yeah, these men tried to get physical with me, certainly is concerning. So the short answer is I did find several gender differences among these relational red flags, and this was one of those gender differences, which is supported by other research, but has now been verified within relational red flags.
Yeah, I see connections between this and David Schmidt's work on social sexuality, which just briefly basically outlined that men are higher on the socio-sexuality index than women. Now, I suppose my next question is how does one sort of navigate this sort of difference in what one desires from the evolutionary standpoint to sort of the social standpoint? Because obviously, it's like this battle against evolution, because how basically how do men become better at sort of is it possible for us to decrease this sort of rate of false positives in men?
That's a very heady question. That is a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, because now we're going against our several thousands of years of evolution of what has been to our benefit strictly from a procreation standpoint. It's important that the species continues. But I would say in terms of where we are now in the 21st century, it goes to modern elements. We are no longer Neanderthals or early cavemen. We are human beings who are living in the year 2020s and beyond. And it's expected that you're supposed to have manners. It's expected that men are supposed to respect women and vice versa. But it's expected that we are not hopefully supposed to be too physically clingy while on a first or second date. Now, again, what the women defined as physical intimacy was what they felt was a physical intimacy to them. This may differ based on each woman. As we already said, relational red flags are relative. So for one woman, it may have just been the man trying to hold her hand. For a woman who identifies as more conservative, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way she wants to live her life. She may feel that, hey, he's trying to hold my hand. It's only the first date. I'm not comfortable with this. Versus another woman who is seen as more progressive, she may say, oh, it's been a good first date. We've been out for 2 or 3 hours. We've had great conversation. I don't mind him holding my hand. That's harmless. So to her, that would not be physical intimacy, immediate intimacy - physical.
My point is that, so how do we make men more perceptive of false positives, right? Because a lot of communication is predicated on things that are outside of the realm of, outside of the domain of strictly verbal communication. I think that's where a lot of the pitfalls come, because you have to sort of take that leap of faith into, are these signals that she's sending me through her body language or facial expressions, are these sort of exhibitions of romantic interest? And I say you have to, but men often sort of feel like they have to take that first initiatory step, and I think that that's what leads to them, having. It necessitates the existence of the false positive, right? Because you have to take that leap of faith.
Oh, okay. Yes, I understand. Yeah, this is very simple. This goes to the idea of consent. Yeah. It's important that the man gets verbal, clear consent from the woman before he does anything that would, within any reasonable person, would appear to be seen as, if it's not welcomed, would of course be harassment or assault. Yeah. Consent is very important. And it's important that both people, understand, hey, I am physically attracted to you. I would like to kiss you or something else. Now, that can seem clunky to have that conversation. And I understand that may seem awkward or odd, but the alternative is even worse. It's kissing someone who doesn't want to be kissed, or even worse, trying to touch them in a way that is inappropriate. And that is a very serious thing. So while a kiss, the example we gave earlier, may not be seen as serious to some, it is still very serious to others. For everyone listening, just put yourself in the other person's shoes. Imagine if strangers just came up to you and started trying to kiss you. I can assure you, you would not like that, okay? So it goes to the very important concept of consent. And here's the thing. If she likes you, she will give consent. If she is receptive to being kissed or held or hugged or whatever, she will have no issue verbalizing that. If she is not comfortable with that, then of course she will let that be known. So I understand it can feel clunky or odd to say, I would like to kiss you, can I kiss you? But there are more subtle, nuanced ways of doing that. But you still need to be clear in your actions, and you need to be clear in, hey, is this okay with you? Because the alternative is far worse. Okay, so in one instance, you feel awkward. big deal, get over it. The alternative is if you don't do that, the woman is going to feel harassed, and that is very serious. So I would rather you feel awkward than she feel harassed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I definitely agree, and I think it's because when you're in an established relationship, I think it's as you get to grow one another, and as one salient feature of romantic relationships is the existence of so-called rituals, which are sort of shared behaviors surrounding different activities. So, like sexual initiation, for example, how you initiate sex is different for people in romantic relationships, right? And that's not necessarily that you sort of ask, do you want to have sex? It's a ritual, so it's a symbolic sort of symbolic behaviors that precede the act. But since your dissertation is strictly confined to initial romantic encounters, yes, I think ascertaining consent verbally is definitely the way to go. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I am by far from the first person to say this. Many people have been saying this for a very long time. I completely agree with it, of course, but I'm not the first person to come up with this. A lot of people have been saying it for a long time, and I want to echo what a lot of people have been saying. And it's not just people who are academics. These are just common people. This is common sense. You don't need to have a freaking PhD to understand that consent is important. And I want to make that very clear. As long as you're a well-adapted adult individual, you need to understand that if the other person isn't comfortable with this action, then that is inappropriate and it should not continue.
Absolutely. We certainly agree there. And I think it's vitally important for young men in particular because, it's like, because like I said, men oftentimes feel like they are pressured to take that sort of leap of faith. And I don't think that's the way it should be. I think like open communication is the best protocol going forward. And it's like, I don't think that if you ask for consent, it's going to make things awkward. If anything, the woman is going to be very appreciative of the fact that, you care to ask because it's just basic decency, and I don't think a lot of guys in particular realize that.
Yes, and as I said earlier, the good news is, guys, if she's receptive, if she likes you, she will want to be kissed. She will want to be held and hugged, and you can feel comfortable progressing further. So the good news is if she's into you, there will be no ambiguity. She will make it clear in some way that she's comfortable with that, yes, I do like you too. So the worst thing that happens is if you feel awkward, big deal, get over it, because the alternative for her is far worse. It should be for you as well.
So I suppose to wrap things up, would you say that the advice to young men in these sort of situations are, if there's any ambiguity whatsoever, you ought to address that right away and face that moment of awkwardness rather than do something that might hurt that other person?
Yes, this is just common sense of human behavior. We should do our best to err on the side of caution. We all want to live in a world that should be safe, but sadly, some people make it hard for all the rest of us. And we all need to do our part to, again, if the worst thing that happens is a little awkwardness, I say that's pretty good because that still keeps everyone safe. It still keeps everyone, because I promise you, she will be receptive and appreciative that you, and probably, depending on the person, she may think, oh, that was cute. He asked that in a clunky, awkward way. That may endear you more to her, guys. So it may actually come out better for you. But I promise you, if she's receptive to building a relationship with you physically and mentally and emotionally, she will let you know that, okay? So that is the good news, all right?
And just as a personal anecdote, when I asked my partner out, when we made it official, I remember it was very awkward because it's quite cute to look back on now, but I remember we were sitting there, the library in the city centre. It's sort of got these windows that are sort of embedded into the wall, so there are these sort of little wall sections that you can sit on, and we were sitting there, and I was working my way up to kissing her, and then I was like, can I kiss you now? And she was like, yes, that's what I've been waiting for. So it was, it's that simple. It really is that simple, guys.
See, she was receptive yeah. And she let you know that.
Yeah.
There we go. Absolutely.
So that's a nice sentiment to end on. If you, unless you have anything else to add, Dr. White.
No, I'm happy that you had me on, and to everyone listening out there, getting older and getting to know yourself, I'm by no means saying any of this is easy, but it takes time and it takes patience. And you need to be patient with yourself and you need to be patient with the other person. And you never stop learning about yourself. You never stop learning in your 20s, 30s, 40s, or beyond. But as long as you keep an open mind, as long as you're doing your best to be receptive to learn about yourself and the person you're on these first few initial romantic encounters, these first few dates with, then I promise you it's better to always err on the side of caution. And you will learn a lot about yourself, and it will be a far more enriching, rewarding experience. Because at the end of the day, that's what we want. These relational red flags are guiding us away from these people that we should not be dating towards those people that we are, to find someone that we are highly compatible with a high degree of similarities, interests, values, actions, personality traits that we share in common with. And I guess just to add lastly, there's a common belief that opposites attract. That is false. That is a pop culture belief that has been definitively disproven across multiple fields of social science research. Opposites do not attract. What does attract is a high degree of similarity, things you have in common, and compatibility, okay? And the more we like people who like us and like the same things we like. Now, that doesn't mean that your partner is going to like every single thing you like. No, you don't have to date a carbon copy. I'm not saying that. But you do need a high degree of similarities, because think about your friends, the people who you are closest to. Do you share a lot of common interests with them? Yes, you do. It's very rare that your best friend is going to hate all of the things you love. That is very rare, okay? Same thing for your romantic partners. They're going to like a lot of the things you like. Again, they don't have to be the exact same person. They're not a carbon copy, but they will have a lot of similarities, and that's what we're looking for. And that's what these relational red flags or warnings of being aware of. Hey, I've noticed I do not have any similarities with this person. I noticed they are violating my expectations of what should happen. I noticed I don't want these things in my mate. Thus, I need to find someone who is not exhibiting these relational red flags. So I know that we covered a lot. I know that I just want people to understand it's hard to give a 2-minute answer to something that has been studied for decades or even hundreds or even thousands of years in terms of the evolutionary research. But the answers are out there. And if you're willing to keep an open mind, we all can make the world a better place. I firmly do believe that. So,
what a great sentiment to end on, Dr. White. For all you listeners who have made it this far, thank you very much. It's been quite a while, but it's been quite a good conversation, I think. So, once again, thank you, Dr. White, for appearing on. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Olaf. Thank you for having me on. Thank you.
Sure. And, yeah, follow us on social media, guys, and that's that.